Joining us now, Delegate Stacey Plaskett, who represents the U.S. Virgin Islands. She's also a member of the House Intelligence Committee. And to that, it's good to have you on the show. I'm curious, Trump's influence on leaders in Congress, your fellow members of Congress, has already stymied legislation, foreign aid, and committees have been used to go after the Biden family. So to what do you say to this threat from within that Trump creates within our politics? What can be done?
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here with you guys this morning. We see it every day in Washington, every day in committees, where we are not doing the business that the American people have sent us there to do, where we are not able to pass legislation that we're normally pass, right? We're about to do a stopgap, potentially a stopgap legislation to continue a continuing resolution for an entire rest of the year for defense spending, Department of Homeland Security, Labor, Health and Human Services, as well as foreign aid. That is outrageous. The fact that the Republican Party cannot agree on defense spending, cannot agree on Homeland Security spending. And wait, why can't they agree on Homeland Security? Because the border bill that was negotiated by a conservative Senate Republican, as well as the Democrats, has been told, don't pass that bill by Donald Trump, because I need to use the border as a leverage point during election, and therefore nothing gets done. At the same time, committees that should be doing the work of American people are engaged in years-long investigations of Biden family with exculpatory evidence given by the individuals that they thought were going to be witnesses, or their star witness being indicted for lying about what he's doing, and they still won't let it go. They're continuing with it. So there's no work that's being done in Washington right now.
So, Delegate Plaskett, obviously the government could shut down on Friday if a deal is not reached. And you just mentioned it here, that Republicans on the Hill are taking their marching orders from Donald Trump. But it's not just on the border security. It's also they're standing in opposition to funding aid to Ukraine, because Trump has suggested he doesn't want that to happen either. So just tell us, how disturbed are you that these men and women elected to serve their constituents are in Washington, that they're taking their cues from someone who we've been playing all morning, has been talking about a bloodbath if he doesn't win, and is saluting a national anthem done by January 6 convicts who he deems hostages?
Well, the highest-ranking Republican in the House, Elise Stefanik, calls those individuals hostages as well. There has been an entire co-opting of the Republican Party. It is no longer functional. And that's what Republicans who think that they want to put Donald Trump back in need to understand, that that's not what's going to happen. You think that your 401ks and your investments are going to do well if Donald Trump is in office? Nothing. The entire country is going to come to a screeching halt at the behest of one individual who is solely interested in his own power, in his own finances, and that of members of his family.
Delegate Plaskett, one of the things, you're on intelligence, one of the things I think people are not aware of as well is that we have the situation now that is grave in Haiti.
Yes.
We have the situation in the Sudan. We have the situation now in Niger last night that wants to remove American presence. Yet China and Russia is all over the African continent. We have a presidential candidate that has called Haiti and those African countries S-hole countries. Give us a picture of how in the Congress, because I see where Kenya said they would send 1,000 troops to Haiti, but the U.S. Congress will not give the budget that Kenya needs in order to do what it does. Tell us how tenuous we are in these situations that could explode any moment.
You know, we're trying to, members of Congress, the Democratic caucus are trying to do what America does, which is to be a leader, which is not just to support other countries, but to support our own national security interests. That's what funding to Ukraine does for us. And with regard to Haiti, we recognize that there is $40 million sitting, waiting to be approved by one individual needs to sign off on that, and that's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. McCall, will not sign off on it so that the Kenyans can receive the funding that they need to bring troops, to bring stability to Haiti, so that they can then create that transitional government that they're working on and ensure that there are elections and quell the gangs. If that does not happen, what we will see is a resurgence of migrants coming to the border from Haiti, which is exactly what the Republicans want, to continue the narrative that they already have about the border being chaotic. But much of that chaos, we know now, is being driven by them, not willing to sit down, not willing to negotiate, not willing to do what's necessary to protect those other nations and individuals in their countries so that they are not coming to our own border.
Democratic delegate Stacey Plaskett of the U.S. Virgin Islands, thank you so much for being on this morning.